So, at this time, I am feeling very honored, and I'm very excited because we have an amazing group of guests who are with us. As I talked about a few minutes ago, we have a lot of challenges, and we know that our mission to stand up for public education is facing threats from all sides. And even though we're the largest labor union in the state, 120,000 strong, we can't wage this battle by ourselves. We have to have people who believe in us, people who share our values, standing with us. And we have 4 individuals who are such incredibly good partners here today to kind of offer some of their insights, talk a little bit about what each of them does as we're connecting the dots between these issues of protecting democracy, protecting public education, protecting union rights, advocating for racial, social, and economic justice, protecting our students' freedom to learn, and then to talk about how we're going to connect on those issues together. So let me introduce you to our 4 special panelists. We'll begin to my immediate left, the Executive Director of the Ohio League of Women Voters. Please welcome Jen Miller. The Executive Director of one of the newest organizations, but certainly one of the most badass organizations in the state, Honesty for Ohio Education, Cynthia Peoples. The President of the Ohio NAACP, Tom Roberts. And the Co-Executive Director of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, here today representing the All In for Ohio's Kids Coalition to address school funding, Molly Shack. So Jen Miller has been leading the League of Women Voters for several years. We've had a chance to get to know each other and work together, and I will say, particularly on the issue of protecting voter rights and on advocating for a fair redistricting process. A great plan. Some people on that commission seem to find every possible way that they could to screw it up. But Jen, it's so good to have you with us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the League and what the League's been doing?
Great. Well, hello, everyone. It's an honor to be with you. I'm a proud daughter of Ohio. I grew up in Shelby. I have 8 family members who are Ohio teachers, and my family thought I should be a teacher. I think I am, just in a non-traditional classroom. The League of Women Voters has actually, you could argue, helped found the League of Women Voters. We were formerly the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association. Our first victory was in 1894, getting women the right to vote in school board races. And then in May 1920, at a convention like this in downtown Columbus, nurses, teachers, businesswomen, reporters, lawyers, the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, the Council on Jewish Women, and the DAR, actually, came together to form the League. Our first purpose was to empower a new group of women voters. If the voter in your household didn't think you had the right to vote or should have the right to vote, you didn't necessarily want to learn from him. So this was about women teaching women the mechanics of voting. But we also immediately started working on advocacy, including compulsory education, state funding for public schools in Ohio, the end of forced marriages and child marriages, the ability for women to divorce, many things. So what does that look like today? Today, that looks like, first and foremost, working on democracy issues, making sure that every Ohioan has access to the ballot and that their votes are meaningful. It also means that we do a lot of different partnerships. So my friend Phil Long is out here with Kids Voting Ohio. Please make sure you check out Kids Voting Ohio. We have actually a free textbook in English and Spanish that we started printing in 1964 called Know Your Ohio Government, and you can get that online if that's something you want. But it also means that we partner with organizations like the OEA and Honesty for Education to really defend Ohioans' rights to quality public education and the right to a functioning democracy.
All right, thank you. So next, I first got to know Cynthia Peoples not long after, I believe, the introduction of House Bill 322 and House Bill 327, two of the first two in a, unfortunately, long line of censorship bills that were introduced by the legislature. Cynthia and her team swept into action very quickly to say, how do we organize to stop these kinds of attacks? So Cynthia, tell us a little bit more about your background and tell us about the Honesty for Ohio Education Coalition.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott, and thank you for the invitation to attend. It is always an honor to be in community with the heroes of public education, so I am here to honor all of you, and it's because of you that the coalition actually came into existence. I myself, I'm a Korean-American woman married to a black man raising 3 multicultural children in America, so I am intimately connected to these issues in public education, specifically ones that are weaponizing race, identity, backgrounds, and culture. So that's why I'm here, first and foremost as a parent, and second as an advocate, a public advocate. Honesty for Ohio Education is a statewide, nonpartisan coalition that's top-line mission is to ensure that every student across the state of Ohio receives an honest, high-quality education that's grounded in truth, facts, and diverse perspectives. And that's regardless of their race, their identity, yes. Regardless of race, identity, background, and zip code. And part of that work includes ensuring that our public education spaces are affirming all identities, cultures, lived experiences in the classroom and in communities, and always prioritizing the rights, the safety, and the well-being of all students, of all educators, and of all families. And our coalition, we do this very important work across 3 critical access points to public education: at the State House, at the State Board of Education, and in our local school districts. And we do this work simultaneously, and it is an incredibly heavy lift, which is why we have to do this in broad coalition with our unions, with the League of Women Voters Ohio, with the NAACP, with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, and more than 50 other statewide partners and organizations across the state of Ohio and across the country. And we really have 3 pillars in our work. We educate, we advocate, and we build community around protecting honest education. And what that looks like right now, just as Jen was talking about issues with democracy, right now that means we are constantly responding to this national extremist agenda that has been imported into the state of Ohio, which is essentially trying to dismantle the face of public education as we know it. And they're using the pipeline of gerrymandering and democracy to do it, because we know that it is our elected leaders at different levels of education that are importing this hurt and harm into public education. One of the beautiful things about our coalition, which I hope that you find is the greatest takeaway, is that this statewide coalition started little less than a year ago with an email thread of pissed off and concerned parents, educators, and advocates. And in that short time, it has grown into a statewide coalition that has national funding and national partners, because this is an existential crisis. And this intersects with all of us, regardless of party, regardless of our ideology. This education intersects with every facet of our lives, so we all have to be paying attention, and we cannot politicize and polarize this issue. It doesn't matter if you're red, blue, or purple. Public education is the bedrock of a high-functioning democracy, so we all have to be active participants and advocates. what I was saying about the coalition, the takeaway is the coalition started as a grassroots effort. It was all about community action and collective action and taking control and not being controlled, which is what all of these organizations up here are advocating and fighting for. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. I first met our next guest when my hair was not gray, and I was working in addition to teaching in Worthington, I was a political action coordinator for Central and attending a lot of committee hearings at the State House. And Tom Roberts was a state senator from Dayton, Ohio, and was a champion for education issues then, and he has gone on to, since his political career ended, has gone on to lead the oldest civil rights organization, the nation's oldest civil rights organization's Ohio organization, the NAACP. So Tom, welcome, and tell us a little bit more about the NAACP and your work here in the state.
Well, thank you, Scott, and let me thank all of you for your support of me and my 20 years in the Ohio General Assembly, working side by side with our new state school board member, Teresa Fetter. We worked very hard to get education on the map and to fight for the rights of teachers and for our students. So let me thank you for your support for 20 years in the General Assembly. Our mission says it is to ensure the political, social, economic equality rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and to assure health and well-being of all persons. The NAACP looked like you. It began over 113 years ago by a multiracial group of individuals who were tired of the lynching of black men in Springfield, Illinois. And they joined with another individual, William E.B. Du Bois, who created the Niagara Movement to put together the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, with the emphasis being on advancement. And even though our words say colored people, all people. NAACP, if you come to our units in Ohio, we have roughly 30. We have one national board, and they set the policy, the guidelines that I, as Ohio Conference President, follow, along with the 30-some units in the state of Ohio that are many of your communities. And in 2017, our leadership said, let's focus in on 7 areas. We call them the game changers. And of course, one of those is education. So I say to you, the relationship between education associations and the NAACP has been strong. Now I see you're 170-some years old and we're only 113, but at least for those 113 years, I would say that we have been right there working with you across the state, across the nation, and locally for fight for public education. Let's make no mistake about it. Our democracy is being challenged by those who don't believe in a democracy. They want an oligarchy. They want white male rule. They don't believe in inclusion. And it's groups like the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, working together for all these years on these many different issues. We have been friends of education. Had it not been for Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, we would not have the quality of education that we do for access for the quality of education for all the students in the nation and in the state of Ohio. We are being challenged, but as groups like education associations, League of Women Voters, and NAACP that are called to be the stewards of this democracy. We have been on the forefront for democracy since its beginning. Crispus Attucks, the first person to die for this nation, African-American male. So I say to the units across the state, and many of you are probably life members or members, let's not be afraid to stand up for this democracy. That's what people wanted us to have, and we are still an experiment. And the challenges that we have to face as an experiment, we have to meet head on. But we should not be afraid to say we are for democracy and we're for public education. So Scott, I look forward to our conversation today. I think we all will be enriched by this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And finally, it's good to have a good friend of OEA. The Ohio Organizing Collaborative has been working as one of our key partners along with Policy Matters Ohio and the Ohio Federation of Teachers to form the All In for Ohio's Kids Coalition. With us today is Molly Shack, a proud graduate of the Columbus City Schools and somebody that we've been working together with for a long time. Molly, tell us a little bit more about OOC and your connection to this work.
Thanks so much. So shout out to the CEA members who just delivered big wins to our Columbus City Schools. As a proud graduate, it was an honor to join you on the picket line, and our students and families are so grateful for the work that you put in. So as Scott said, I'm Molly Shack. I serve as one of the co-executive directors at the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. We run one of the largest community organizing networks in the state, made up of members of faith-based organizations, student organizations, and community organizations. I actually got my start as a student activist and leader. It was in the days of SB 5, which we started a little while ago hearing about. My dad was a business agent for the local stagehands union, and students joined together, supported by the Ohio Organizing Collaborative and the faith community and community members, to stand up and say, when collective bargaining rights are attacked for public employees, it hurts all of us. And since then, for the last 10 years, I have traveled this state from corner to corner, talking to community members about what we need. And in the faith-based organizing tradition, we talk about a concept called abundance, the idea that we have everything we need right here to provide for our communities, for our families to thrive. And I believe that we have everything we need to have fully and fairly funded schools in Ohio. Yeah, you can clap for that. We do. In the early days of the pandemic, many of you, I'm sure, have blinders on trying to forget what it felt like drinking water out of a fire hose when the big debates around schools opening and closing, masks, vaccines, there was a lot of big fights going on in big ways. And what we saw was that some national politicians were trying to pick on unions and pick on teachers' unions as the enemy of children, as the enemy of parents, rather than the protectors, the guardians, and the educators of our kids. And so our organizations saw what was happening, and in the midst of attacks on our honesty for education, attacks on racial justice, attacks on our democracy, we're saying we have big, big problems in Ohio to address, and right now we are focused on the wrong things. And so often what happens is parents and community members end up pointing their fingers at the wrong people and the wrong things because we're mad, we're not getting what we need, but we don't totally understand or have access to understand what's really going on. And what's really going on is a set of people in Columbus have made a decision that they'd rather give tax breaks to wealthy corporations and the top 1% than fully fund our schools. That is a choice. It is a choice that we do not have to make. And so together with our policy partners at Policy Matters Ohio, with the Ohio Federation of Teachers, with the Ohio Association of Public School Employees, we joined together to say, okay, we need to break this conversation in a new direction. It needs to be about whether you live in a big city or a small town, or you live in the country, or you live in the suburbs. Our problems might look different, but we have one common solution, which is to fully and fairly fund our schools. We've got kids in Columbus waiting way too long for a bus to come pick them up, and we have kids in Appalachia dealing with the same problems. But right now, rather than joining together and saying we deserve fully funded schools, we often are looking at, oh, well, the suburbs are rich. Well, really, they're capped and they're not getting the funds that they need. The cities are underserved. Appalachia and rural communities don't have what they need. The problems look different, but we do have a path. And so the Fair School Funding Plan was created by many of you in this room, I'm sure, a large coalition of stakeholders, and we decided we were going to try to change the conversation and say, rather than these divisive distractions, we need to come together and pass the Fair School Funding Plan. So in the last budget cycle, we joined together to bring parents into the conversation, to be advocates in big ways, to bring students into the conversation, to say we need to fully and fairly fund our schools, we need to beat back these distractions, we need to trust educators and local communities to serve their students the best way they know how. There's a lot of people in the State House who do not have the degrees you all have, who are trying to decide how we should teach our students, and we just think they're not equipped. And so our mission is to fully and fairly fund our schools in whatever way requires us to do that. We have enough. States across the country, red and blue, have done this. And frankly, this should not be about right versus left. This should be about right versus wrong. And what is right is to fully fund our schools, and that's what we're here to do.
Thank you, Molly. So we got about 15 or 20 minutes, and I knew when we set this up that I wish we would have had an entire day to have this conversation, and we don't. But I think each of you kind of laid out what the challenges are, what the problems are, and how some people are doing that divide and conquer strategy that I talked about a few minutes ago. I want to just hone in on a couple of particular issues and just get your perspective, whoever wants to share that. One of the big issues that we know that we're facing, and again, particularly looking at legislation that's already been introduced, and there's a lot of talk about legislation potentially coming next year, and that is to dramatically increase vouchers. House Bill 290 is the so-called backpack bill. Anybody who wants to jump in, talk a little bit about how you see that voucher issue connected to the vision of fully and fairly funded schools, honesty for education, protecting democracy, protecting racial justice in our state. What's your perspective on this idea of universal vouchers? Whoever wants to start.
I'll give my quick synopsis from the Honesty Coalition perspective, and then I'm going to pass it over to Molly to take a much deeper dive. What we're seeing as far as these national attacks is the greater agenda to cause a push out from public education into privatized education, and really divesting federal and state funding from fully resourcing and fully funding our school districts, and giving families options, financial options, by siphoning money out of public education to go into this privatized network, whether that's through charters, whether it's through faith-based schools, or whatever kind of other privatized education. And right now they're using fear, they're using hardening of schools, they're using indoctrination. Right now they're attacking identity and sexuality. They're calling educators groomers and pedophiles. So there's a whole rash of fear-mongering that's happening. But what we need to understand is this is to create a push-out from public education into privatized education. And we know we have many legislators in the State House that are very sympathetic to privatized education, which is why we're seeing these bills and this unconstitutional funding never being fully addressed.
So I'll just hop in. I think it's pretty clear that there's a set of interests trying to destroy public education. That is their mission. They do not want public education to exist for a number of reasons, in my opinion. One is that an educated, well-rounded population is a threat to their ideas. Publicly funded schools that are accountable to community members who vote and to unions who bargain is a threat to their control and their power. And they know that we have a movement who wants generally the same things across the state. We want to have safe communities. We want to have well-funded schools. We want to have jobs where people can earn enough to provide for their families and still have time to spend with them. And public education is the bedrock of that. So this attack, I think, exploits, and this is where I think we have to be smart as leaders and organizers, they exploit the real hurt and pain that many of you all and our parents and our students feel from decades of unconstitutionally underfunded schools. And so they blame teachers, they blame unions, they blame public schools and try to siphon out the resources so that they can make a profit. The idea that people should be getting rich off of our students and off of our tax dollars, it is public, very transparent, and legal robbery, in my opinion. They are stealing resources from our communities because they don't have to provide IEPs. They don't have to provide resources to students who need extra support. So I think we have to fight this at every turn, but what we can't do is plug our ears and pretend like there are not problems, right? We have to acknowledge that so many of us are struggling, and the only way that we overcome those challenges is by joining together, not by destroying public education.
So another issue that oftentimes we hear gets thrown into the mix is this whole issue of parental rights. Now, I was sharing with the delegates before you came in about how another partner organization of ours, the Children's Defense Fund of Ohio, has done extensive research showing that parents overwhelmingly support their children's educators. But we still hear a lot of these attacks come under the guise of parental rights. And Tom, I imagine, you know, within the NAACP and within a lot of the communities where you have organizations, this idea of empowering parents is something that we all agree is important. Anybody want to talk about kind of what your sense is how opponents of public education have essentially tried to seize that idea of parental rights, but how should we be responding to that? What should we be doing to kind of put our truth out there? And Tom, if you want to start.
Well, let me try. You know what? I think you have to hear what Molly said about destroying public education and go back to your Education Class 101 and why Thomas Jefferson and others pushed for public education. So we would have an educated citizenry, so we knew our rights and our responsibilities. So we had a workforce that was people who could understand and be employable. That's what public education is all about. We hear all of these things that are in the mix of destroying public education. Scott and I remember when a legislator up in Toledo, when she first started talking about charter schools. And then we start talking about, well, let's have a couple of models and study them. I don't think the study ever took place.
No.
And all of a sudden, charter schools now are all over the map in every community. You and I have to say, we want our parents involved. We all want our parents involved. But that is not what they want. That is a smokescreen for other activities, you know, to deny children with disabilities assistance, or to deny children who are transgender accessibility in our schools. You and I have to stay focused on the true meaning of public education and what it's all about. And that's why I will go back to Brown versus the Board of Education, because Thurgood Marshall laid out the foundation for why we need free public access to education. It's so important to this nation of ours and to our children. As one of our colleagues who some of you knew as C.J. Prentice would say, our babies. It's all about our babies. So I don't get confused about the boondoggle. And we were talking before we came on that some of our colleagues have gone to this ALEC conference. You know, that's where they get their miseducation. But you and I have to stay true to what public education is all about and what it means to this nation and to our babies, as C.J. Prentice would say.
Jen, did you want to jump in on this?
You know, I do, of course, support parental rights. We all do. Obviously, that's not what they're really talking about. When I think about parental rights, one of the things I think is that if there's going to be armed personnel me as a parent should be able to know who that is in a school. But that's not what they're talking about, right? They're not talking about real parental rights. And I just want to say this, the same forces that are prioritizing, privatizing education, the same forces that are pushing these culture wars, these artificial narratives that somehow critical race theory is actually being taught in schools, which we know it's not, are the same forces that are, limiting our health care and are gerrymandering our state house, right? Our state house is now more gerrymandered this decade than last, after 72% of Ohioans voted to reform the process after the Ohio Supreme Court knocked down those maps 5 times, and they're gerrymandering the state school board, right? It's all the same forces because it's about economic power. It's about silencing all of us. It's about taking away our rights. And I think that's where we need to remember to work together. What I always say to young people when they think that their vote doesn't count is if it didn't, it wouldn't have taken so long to get the right to vote, and they wouldn't work so hard to take it away. And I would say the same thing about you. If you want proof of the difference that you make in the lives of children, look at how much public education is being attacked. And this is where we have to figure out how to work together and stand together. And that's why it's my honor to be here with you, because I know that you are building the next generation of civic leaders. I know that you are making sure that the next generation of voters and democracy advocates will not be confused about the power of democracy, the power of our votes, the accuracy and trustworthiness of our elections. You all are making that difference every day, and it's my honor to stand with you.
Thank you so much, John.
Can I add one thing to that, Scott?
Go ahead, Cynthia. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask everyone in this room and whomever is watching to reframe this narrative of parental rights, because we have to step into modern society and really think about who is raising our children. It's not just parents. We are trying to reshape and reclaim family rights, because it is grandmothers, it is grandfathers, it is aunties, it is uncles, it is the entire family, it's neighbors that are raising our children. So when we hear parental rights, please shift that to family rights. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to understand that this narrative around parental rights is really a narrative to pipe in dishonest education. It is the right to censor and police and monitor educators. Because when they're talking about parental rights, they're not talking about all parents. They're talking about a very specific group of parents, and they're talking about a very specific right to discriminate, a very specific right to censor, a very specific right to target. So when you leave this area, please think about reclaiming the narrative and reclaiming our words, because our words and our definitions around edu-talk, edu-speak, pedagogy is being hijacked by these extremists, and we have to own the definitions. You as educators, that's what you do in your daily lives, in your classrooms, with your colleagues and your students. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's, I always find it interesting, and I have conversations with legislators or conversations with reporters, and these kinds of questions come up, and I always think about my 30 years as an educator, and it's like, I wish we had way more parental involvement. This is not a competition between educators wanting to support students and parents wanting something different. We all want the same thing, and I bet every single one of you would agree with me. Our biggest problem is that we don't have enough communication, engagement, support, connection with parents. We want more. We are partners. If we're going to be successful, then we really have to work together. And so, there are people on the other side that have created this dichotomy that just isn't true in reality in our schools on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to ask each of you to kind of leave us with a parting word or two of wisdom. And I know this seems kind of overwhelming. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on and all these forces that we're up against. What do we do? What do we do? If each of you in your closing minute or so could give us one action, one strategy, one takeaway to kind of help us maybe not feel so overwhelmed by all of this. And whoever wants to jump in first can start.
The first thing that I would say is to organize. No one person can do this alone, and whether it looks like organizing in your own community with your neighbors and with your educators, with your students, with your neighbors, great. We need local grassroots organizing, or whether it's organizing through organizations and business leaders and faith leaders. We need to do this together. This harm is coming in well-funded and well-coordinated. It's coming in from a national level, and now it's coming in through the cracks and crevices in the state. So I would say community organizing.
Thank you, Cynthia.
I would say collaboration, and don't feel overwhelmed. And I like the members on this panel because we like each other. We've worked together over the last 10, 15 years with the League of Women Voters. The Organizing Collaborative led the effort with APRI, NAACP to put together fair maps. We had public hearings across the state and put together fair maps, sent it to the commission, and they didn't do anything about it. So what I'm saying to you is grab a hold of your ball, grab a hold of what you're strong at, and knowing you have advocates who are going to work with you at the state and local level. Do what you can do best, knowing that we are working collaboratively at the state level. You're not in this fight alone. This is a fight to the end for the rights of our children, and as my friend CJ would say, for our babies. So let's continue to work together in a collaborative effort. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
I think it's really important to remember that you all are the experts in your classrooms. You are the experts of your experience. And the ideas that are coming out of the people who are trying to destroy public education, they don't make sense. We can't logic our way out of people who are trying to destroy public education. They trust you all with weapons, but not with a lesson plan. It just doesn't make sense. So we have to remember that we need to have some courage. They were told by the State Supreme Court of Ohio to pass fair maps. They said, nah. They were under court order contempt. We have to be brave. We like to follow rules, we like order, but we need to get a little uncomfortable because the people who benefit from our silence are not our kids. It is uncomfortable to talk about politics when you just want to do your job. It's not your fault that your career and our communities have become politicized, but it is our responsibility. So we have to dig deep and be uncomfortable. We have to join coalitions. We have to talk politics. We say we are nonpartisan, but we are very political because our work, our students, our families, and our rights are political.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Defending democracy and defending public education are the same work. I'm going to say it again. Defending democracy and defending public education are the same work. The one thing I want from you is they're trying to divide us. They're trying to silence us. Let's resist that urge. The first act of resistance is loving one another and working with one another. And I truly believe that this is our Ohio, and we will not lose if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom wanted to jump in with another.
It is moments like this that I would encourage you to read Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. We only listened to I Have a Dream speech. We didn't hear the first part about giving us insufficient check. But if you read the letter for Birmingham jail, that empowers you and I to do what we need to do. As that's what Dr. King talked about, where there is injustice anywhere is where we need to be. And that's what we're faced with. So I ask you, as you conclude and go into your holidays, read Dr. King's letter from Birmingham Jail. You will feel very empowered to do what needs to be done as he did, and that we can just stop memorializing him, but to implement what Dr. King and others stood for. Scott, thank you for the 30 seconds.
Thank you. So we've been given some homework. I'm going to give you one more thing. If we can put the slide up. I'm going to ask you all to do something very simple right now. Take out your phones, and you should see, if we can put the slide on the screen, you'll see a QR code. And we're asking you to, once that's up, there it is, take a picture of that QR code. That will take you to our action alert on HJR6. HJR6, as we talked about before, would take away people's voices to make it much harder to pass citizen-initiated constitutional amendments. It's one of the important tools that we have at our disposal. Make your voice heard, contact your state representative and state senator. We're making it really easy for you. Follow up with a phone call, follow up with a conversation, talk to your neighbors, go home on Monday and make sure that every single one of your members knows about the importance of taking action on this. We need to make our voices heard on this. HJR6 is a way that public education, democracy, honesty, and education, it all connects together. Everybody, please join me in thanking our incredible panelists, Jen Miller, Cynthia Peoples, Tom Roberts, and Molly Shack. Thank you all for your partnership, for being partners in this effort to protect and defend public education and our students. Thank you so much.